Welcome back to Conversations at the Leaky Cauldron, episode 3, chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14 in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the fourth volume and the 7-volume set. And here back with me are my esteemed colleagues, Miss Sarah Miller and Mr. Wes Schantz. Welcome back, Sarah. Welcome back, Wes.
Happy Monday.
Glad to have you here on Monday. And welcome back, Sarah. And so today we were going to talk about Aboard the Hogwarts Express, 11, 12, the Triwizard Tournament, 13, Mad-Eye Moody, 14, the Unforgivable Curses. And then also we were going to talk a little bit at the end as sort of a special treat about holiday hijinks we would like to get into in the magical world. What sorts of holiday activities spruced up by magic would we enjoy doing? And so we'll talk about that at the end. And so, y'all, I have some ideas sketched out. You know, we meet Rita Skeeter here. We hear about what aurors are. We meet this Mad-Eye Moody guy, and wow, he takes a practical approach. He's weird. How he deals with Draco might make us think some things about him that we really like. His eye is blue and can turn around in weird ways. We also meet SBEW and see Hermione starting to sort of bloom into her role of fighting for the oppressed and getting to what she does best, working in the library. And Fred and George sort of, you know, they're very different from usual, you know. They're very reserved and not the center of attention, and they're filling out things in the corner. And what are they working on? And there's this Triwizard Tournament now. What is this thing? And so I think we have a lot of questions here. Where would y'all like to start?
What do you think, Wes?
I guess I found it kind of interesting that just like looking at numbers a little bit, that the Triwizard Tournament and the Unforgivable Curses both come in threes. I don't know if
and
that's
the number of champions.
Well, yeah, right. So by extension, the way that this book is sort of breaking new ground, right? It's beyond the trilogy, which is a little bit unusual for fantasies. But anyway, so like, yeah, there's something very fitting about the number 3, of course, in terms of fairy tales and traditional stories and whatnot. But I found that particular parallel kind of interesting. I don't know if we could. Probably we should start with something about the Triwizard Tournament, but I'm more interested, honestly, in the Unforgivable Curses, I think.
I mean, those are the most interesting things, right? They just grasp your attention with horror and even a personal horrific connection in terms of Neville and what they can do to a human, right? Reducing them to, a blithering, sort of mindless, creature, like what happened to Neville's parents, which is horrifying. And we get to sort of, again, see this nuanced, dark version of the world. It's like, again, this tone we keep talking about, which is this darkening tone and this deepening perspective on the world. It's making me think more and more that the better or more sophisticated the fantasy, the more it is going to be just like our world in terms of how people act. And yeah, well, I would start by saying that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how much Moody wants them to confront that. And like we've talked in our previous readings about the different kinds of dark arts teachers that they've had. And, one of them was completely inept. Well, actually, a couple of them were completely inept, but in different ways. Lockhart was a liar. Quirrell was a coward. I don't know what Lupin's flaw would be, aside from something kind of outside of his control, which was, being a werewolf. But I did find myself at certain moments thinking that Lupin was a little bit too friendly for a teacher, and yet of the 3, he was clearly the superior that they'd had. And yet Lupin just, boom, like through the first 3 teachers, he basically calls them out and says, you haven't really spent a lot of time facing the things that are like really, really potentially going to damage your lives. I'm looking for the passage, but he says, this is in my book, it's on page 211. He says, "You're very behind on dealing with curses. So I'm here to bring you up to scratch on what wizards can do to each other. I've got 1 year to teach you how to deal with dark, et cetera, et cetera." And then he admits he's only planning to stay for 1 year and then go back to retirement. But I thought that phrase was interesting where he says, "I'm here to teach you what wizards can do to each other," as though like darkness, the dark arts really are a choice that wizards make, as opposed to like dark, sort of dangerous, villainous creatures that they've learned to deal with or learned about and wrote papers about. I think that's interesting. And to your point, Wes, about 3, I think the fourth dimension of like things all of a sudden needing to be in time and in motion is really visible as like the number 3 and the number 4 kind of become important, at least in the next few chapters, when 3 becomes 4.
And it's interesting, and just a connection to Dante, I don't know if this is consciously done or not, but, in the beginning of his Divine Comedy, which is split into 3 in so many ways, there are triple line stanzas, there are 33 cantos per canticle, there are 3 canticles, but in the first one, the Inferno, there are 34, which has that
34.
3 and 4, and so you see him sort of breaking with tradition in order to accord with perfect form, though. And I think that's sort of interesting too, because this is 4 on the way to 7. In the same way that his 34 is on the way to 100. And so there seems to be sort of an interplay between a move that might seem like a false step if taken as like a final step, when in reality it's a part of the journey. And so you can't quite see it for what it is yet. And I wonder if that's sort of part of the interplay between the 3 and the 4. And the Jungians make a big deal about 3 and 4 and quaternaries as images of perfection and completion, and triple images like the Trinity as images of pursuit of perfection, still active. So like they claim that's why the Catholics assumed Mary into heaven in the 20th century, because the Trinity needed that 4th, that feminine element. And I don't know, very interesting way to look at, art.
Yeah, I think that the way that the Tri-Wizard tournament is discontinued was kind of interesting too.
Right.
Like, in some way, it points forward to the Unforgivable Curses in that way too. It's like there's this dark side to the tournament, which led to it being discontinued at a certain point, and they're only now finally reviving it. So it's like you kind of have the question about like perfection, like from what standpoint is it perfect? Is it the thing that you can stop doing because you've finished it, or is it the thing that you can stop doing because you don't think you can do it any better, and doing any more is just going to make it worse, right? Like with the Tri-Wizard tournament, and it seems like also that sort of goes to the idea of the large international sort of scope of this book, and the humongous size of this book just overall, right? That we've just seen the Quidditch World Cup, and now we're going to see the Tri-Wizard tournament. The way that the series is kind of like breaking the boundaries of England, right? The kind of insularity of the previous books is you can see through it a little bit in book 3, Hogsmeade for the first time, but much more so here, where you're hearing about wizards from other countries and other continents and whatnot.
Yeah, I think I'm really interested now in all of this number stuff. I guess I had sort of thought about it, but not in such depth. I guess I mean, in this reading, do we meet the people from the other schools, or is that a no?
Not yet.
I guess no, not yet. Okay. Yeah, I think it might be cool to unpack some of what we notice in the language of the unforgivable curses. The one that always stood out to me as I was teaching this book for like an independent tutorial is my students were really interested in all of like the Latin roots, which I'm sure the two of you are well versed in, and then it's not something that is worth your awe or your wonder because you read it and you're like, well, of course she picked that word. But I think the curses always can be like a really cool moment of recovery where you realize that like, oh wow, like that's how she made this new thing, this piece of quote unquote magic was the use of some type of Latin construction, like the imperative for like the word for imperative for the curse where you force somebody to do something. But I always thought it was interesting that like when I did research on the killing curse, it came up not as having roots in Greek or Latin, but as having roots in Aramaic, which to me is super interesting, given what you just said, Alex, about the Trinity, and the many references that you and we have continued to make to the Inferno.
Yeah,
and I'm just looking it up right now, but I'm almost positive it was something about. I'm sorry, I just lost it. Anyway, but I do seem to remember that. I don't know if any of you looked it up. I'd be curious if you did, what you found.
Not yet, but that is very interesting, especially because we learned that you have to have a lot of power behind it, and all the students at this point could not even make his nose bleed. And that's interesting because in the movies you sort of get the sense that you just have to say the words, but apparently you need a little more. But something about the curses and the connection to them in the Triwizard Tournament are the predictions that Harry makes. And I think this will segue into the curse as well, because I know we want to think about them probably specifically and the fact that they're taught and what that means, and whether that's sort of a mirror shield of Perseus to look at Medusa so that they aren't traumatized in reality, and whether they have to procedurally sort of experience that. I'm
sorry, I just found out. I'm just going to interrupt. I just saw it. According to J.K. Rowling at an Edinburgh Book Festival in 2004, she said, quote, "Does anyone know where Avada Kedavra came from? It is an ancient spell in Aramaic, the original of abracadabra, which means let the thing be destroyed. Originally, it was used to cure illness, and the thing was the illness. But she decided, and then in quotes, I decided to make it the thing as in the person standing in front of me. I take a lot of liberties with that. I twist them around and make them mine," end quote. But I just think the let the thing be destroyed is so interesting. And that it comes from the language that Jesus would have spoke is fascinating to me as well.
Yeah, and it is a use of language itself to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is like embodied, articulated hate, which destroys the community. Like it is a pure betrayal. And that's really, okay, so I want to consider that specifically, but I also just want to put this on the table too before it drops out of my head. The predictions that Harry makes, that he thinks he's just joking about, that he's completely correct about. Yeah. When he says on Monday, he might get burnt. The dragons, the first challenge. Tuesday, lose something precious. That's literally what is taken from all of the champions. Somebody close to them. And then third, comes out worse than a scrap. And this is how I connect this to the Unforgivable Curses. There will be a connection between coming out worse than a scrap at the end of this and the use of an unforgivable curse. And I wonder if, again, we're reading this in a darkly metaphorical way, that means that what one of these boys was willing to do in order to win. And that is how Voldemort becomes re-embodied. And I just want to put that as like a hypothesis that can, we can discount or embody it if it's real, if it's good. But I'm very interested in that. But in what way does Harry in that third prophecy come out the worse? And maybe we can only answer that question later on, because at least in one way, and I think this goes back to Wes's point about Harry's behavior when he won the Quidditch Cup, but did not help his friend defend Buckbeak. How Gryffindor was he really being? And so in this text, we see, sorry, I was just dropping out of my head the parallel exactly that can one of y'all finish that for me? I'm sorry.
No. So what you're suggesting that something about Harry failing to live up to like the truest or richest or purest form of the virtue.
Oh yeah. So
of his house is
just as he might win the tournament, he might lose something far more important. Yes, thank you, Sarah. Yes, just like in the third
something
one,
about
in a smaller way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the unforgivable curses then.
So does that mean that I'm just going to try and connect this by thinking out loud. Wes, you were saying that like the three unforgivable, why can't I say that word? It's because I'm tired. Those three bad curses that get you, one-way ticket to Azkaban or whatever it is that Moody says. Is it that there's like a fourth element that's required, like some kind of extra thing to put all three of those in real motion? It's like some kind of darkness or failure or imperfection within the or hatred, I guess, maybe even within the mind and heart of the speaker. Because he does say, like you said, Alex, he does say, you could all use these words all at once at me and it wouldn't do anything. So it kind of seems like the three curses are insufficient on their own. And that or the language itself is insufficient on its own. There's like a fourth thing necessary to, push the ball off of the mountain. Like they have this potential energy, but need a push.
That's interesting to what extent a conscious will is necessary behind a curse like that. And so what might be required is consciously choosing to take away the will of another, because there seems to be an element of taking the willpower from one at various levels in these curses. On the one hand, you take away their ability, their motor control, and you act for them, like the old Yerks in Animorph series. In the other, you actually contort their body in pain and make them, again, motorically move in a way you want them to. And then in the third, Avada Kedavra, you take their life from them and their ability ever to choose again. And so it's interesting to what extent that is like pure malevolence or ill will you put in there to take away the will of another conscious being. It's like the most wrong or the most antisocial act for a group creature.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it quite that way, but it's making a lot of sense as you guys are talking about it. And I'm thinking about the way that the characters respond to each of the curses as Moody performs them. So the first one makes everyone laugh because the spiders are doing acrobatics, and he challenges them to think about a little more like what that really means. Then the second one, the Cruciatus, is the one that Hermione screams out that he has to stop. So again, we see her standing up for the downtrodden there, and like standing alone, really, right? Everyone else is kind of just in shock, and she's the one who speaks up. and she does it because she notices what's going on with Neville, right? So that's another aspect of this that we don't know the whole story there yet, but we'll find out. And then with the third one, this was the line in the reading that struck me the most, I think, where it says, Moody raised his wand, and Harry felt a sudden thrill of foreboding.
Yes.
That really, I was really curious what to make of that combination of emotions there. And the way that the spell is actually described is really interesting too. So there's a flash of blinding green light and a rushing sound as though a vast, invisible something was soaring through the air. Instantaneously, the spider rolled over onto its back, unmarked, but unmistakably dead. And so there's all those negatives there, right? Invisible, and unmarked and unmistakable. And that refers, I think, to the unforgivableness too. I think the unforgivableness might be the fourth thing, but I'm not quite sure how to connect that with the idea of like taking away will or whatever.
It's a negating aspect. That's what this thing embodies, a pure negation of preventing. That's interesting. Win language right there, right? That you are keeping one from ever expressing oneself. Again, that's interesting to what extent that is what evil is using your will to negate the will of another and thus not producing anything, right? Instead of working together and producing, great wealth or something great, you just weaken everybody by that.
Also, I mean, we'll see, of course, the consequences of the Cruciatus curse and what that does to a human later. But I think also, I always sort of thought about the unforgivable curses as things that were unforgivable, like in your society, like you will never be welcomed back into the fold if you do this. But I think that the way that each of them functions, this is just now sort of something that was coming to me when you were talking, when both of you were talking just now. It's like it also forever makes impossible the potential for person to person reconciliation in like the most literal sense, not in like the forgiveness religious sense, but like restoration of relationship between the victim and the victimizer is impossible if you can't trust that the victim is fully giving that restoration because their will has been impugned by some imperative curse. If their mind is no longer attached to reality because of torture, or if they're legitimately no longer alive, right? Like not only could the person who uses these curses be shunned by their community, but the person who suffers immediately as a consequence, that relationship is forever severed in some way. Interestingly enough, I think maybe because that is severed, that person has severed their relationship to the community as well. I don't know. It seems, I think, Wes, the point that you brought up about Hermione being the one to, not because the spider is suffering, but because this friend / classmate of hers is suffering. Like her attention is not necessarily where everybody else's is, but it's where it ought to be. And I think like she is emerging, like we said, as like this person who has a sense, maybe a little extreme at the moment when she decides she's going on a starvation diet, but like she has this sense of right and wrong, like a real like moral compass. And occasionally it can be really annoying to her friends, but we've said it for a while now that her attention seems to be in the right place before a lot of other people's attention is in the right place, and her attention is on a relationship, like not, I don't know if that makes any sense, but she seems to be attentive to her own community, I think
She is very good at caring for others and noticing the needs and wants of others, as we noted in her choice of gift for Harry. And she will actually be a major emotional support to him here. While I think J.K. Rowling also makes some fun of the good-hearted, but sometimes not sort of efficiently minded aspects of that mentality, when the first thing that Hermione wants to do to help people is to have a membership drive and to have them buy membership memorabilia. And I think that is a funny comment. It's like, okay, well, the first thing we're going to do is not help them. We're going to, get members. And it's like, that's not very grassroots. But I wanted to just mention that just continuing to agree with you guys, that what is also impossible after seeing these curses is to believe that the world itself is just good and not evil. And particularly this
Right.
Hogwarts world, for these students, they cannot go back to a naive worldview where magic just makes everybody good and nice and sweet. Actually, it can be used in just as awful a way as your imagination can be construed, because that's exactly how it would be, right? Add intelligent, malevolent human plus magic, bang, here's what you get. And then also what we as sort of adolescent readers would have been getting is that even in this fantasy world that we might be trying to escape to, because the world in which we live is so difficult, even in here there's evil and terrible, malevolent evil, and you need to be skillful in your learning to deal with it as well. And I think that's just I think that's a very ethical and correct move on the part of J.K. Rowling.
So what else?
I'm sorry.
Oh no, I just said, what else would you guys want to talk about? I can't hear anybody.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I really like the point about.
Were you on mute? Were you on mute, Wes? Sorry.
I think so.
Yeah.
The point you made about the Avada Kedavra is really, really interesting, because abracadabra is kind of the quintessential magic words, right? And so going back to like what that actually means, that's really interesting too, because when we think about magic, we, I guess, tend to think about it in terms of something sort of lighthearted or just good, right? And the imagination is probably that way too, or creativity, right? Like all these kinds of concepts are sort of morally valenced on the good side of things generally, and unreflectingly perhaps, but they're just as right full of negative potential. And Moody's lesson here seems to be constant vigilance, right? Like he shouts this numerous times, that there's no counter curse, and the way that you defend yourself against these is through constant vigilance. And they call him Mad-Eye Moody because he's a little bit off, right? Like he is so constantly vigilant that he doesn't really function anymore. And outside of like catastrophic situations, he's not somebody that you want to be around really. And he also points out, like it wasn't Harry Potter's constant vigilance that saved his life, right? There is something else here that people don't understand, and that maybe isn't something that's Moody's place to teach us. But anyway, there is something that breaks out of the lesson here, and that's Harry Potter. And so we get one more time, and not for the last time, the story of his parents' deaths, like how he's been dealing with that, and how that's sort of like in the background of everything, how it's inexplicable that he should have survived this. I think that's something that should sort of be cueing us to, that this is still not the whole story, right? As much as Moody is couching this as like, facing this thing and knowing what you're up against and this and that. Like, it's an important part of the story, but it's still only a part of the story, I guess. He's got that aspect of him with the possessed dustbins that are such a big thing about when he's first introduced, and Arthur Weasley has to go and mop up his mess with the policemen, the Muggle policemen. So there's something about Mad-Eye Moody that is very impressive. There's this whole the darkness and all that, but there's also something a little bit, just incomplete about him, just a little off. And obviously we'll learn a lot more about that as we go along here.
Well, I think that's so interesting that you say that what he presages is not knowing what the next step in the story, and sort of a predict, what you should know is that there are layers of the story yet to have been revealed to you, and you are in sort of a proximate zone of having them revealed to you over time and in the near future, because that's been so much of what this book is, right? Like, all of a sudden the wizarding world is an international world, and here's this huge event, and well, actually here's this huge new event from 100 years ago, and there's just so much more to it when we could be getting comfortable with the world. In fact, the right way to go is to expand the world and to show us just how little we really do know, to sort of re-disorient us so that we continue to sort of get that thrill of exploring this now larger zone of fictional narrative. And I wonder to what extent that's sort of the progress of consciousness in the Piagetian way, that if you start to get bored where you are, you need to explore more, not less. Like, you're not seeing as sophisticated a way as you can. You're seeing too simplistically, because there is always more to be seen, as we're seeing in this wizarding world. You have to go deeper down the rabbit hole, I guess, is what I think the force or the direction of this narrative is pushing us towards, right? We're even seeing kids get traumatized in school here. We're going to be dealing with some serious themes again. And I feel like three was serious, but 2 had a really deadly seriousness with the idea of a dead student. And I think we get back to that sort of deadly seriousness, but in a very different way in this text.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the kinds of humor that we do get, to lighten the mood and stuff. I don't know, one of the other most striking lines in this part, maybe I'm getting it from a different chapter, sorry, but if I am, but does Ron make that Uranus joke?
Yes.
In this?
Oh my goodness.
Come on, Ron, wow. Okay, so there's that. There is still little flashes of humor.
So high school boy. Oh my God.
Well, yeah, and we get Harry. We also get Harry dreaming of Cho, and his crush, and he's real glad that Ron can't see into his mind, which also foreshadowing, right? But yeah, go ahead.
And Peeves has a big role here, and we learn a couple things because of Peeves. For one, Peeves really does rain on their parade, literally. Then we learn an interesting nugget of wisdom about the house elves from Peeves's doings, and that sort of illustrated to me why the trickster figure in mythology presages the wise figure or the hero, because the trickster uses his or her mind to go outside the rules and then gets usually punished by the rules, and thus understands the reasons behind the rules and becomes wise because of being sort of a trickster or criminal. And we become wise because of Peeves is going outside the scope of normal boundaries. And thus the stories appended to him expand our wisdom and map of things. And I thought that was really, and I know we're talking about funny things, but as just a funny character, it is interesting to what extent he's also a big source of information.
He's also an example of the hierarchies that maybe go unexamined. Isn't he not invited to something, and so he makes a mess in the kitchens? Yeah. And so, not unlike the house elves who are revealed, of course, at first when we meet Dobby, but I think it's Hagrid who later in the chapters, or in the next reading assignment, he's going to say, well, there's an odd one in every bunch, referring to Dobby. Not knowing, of course, that Hagrid is the odd one in his own bunch, but that's beside the point. The point is, I think there are, like you said, there are increasing elements of the world that we're being exposed to, and they're not necessarily the beautiful elements, but they are elements that are recognizable, right? So like, and like the unforgivable curses, and the things of darkness that we come to discover in our own world, you can't really ever unknow them or go back to a time when that was not known. That's just not how that works. I've been teaching Catcher in the Rye, and have you guys read that book, by the way?
Yes, long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, high school classic. I hated it in high school. I thought he was a whiny, annoying prat. And then I had to teach it at Cristo Rey, and not only was he whiny and annoying, but he was like pretty white and rich and entitled, and that was annoying as well. And then I taught it again at Gonzaga, and I just did a poor job of it. I didn't really give it the airtime, the space to breathe. But this is the fourth time I've read it, and the third time I've taught it, and it is like hitting me in the gut. There's this passage where he is, sorry, I know this is a bit of a deviation, but I figured it's okay. Holden is talking about the Museum of Natural History in New York City and how much he likes the museum, because he used to go there with his sister, and nothing ever changes in the museum. Everything is preserved under these glass cases, and nothing moves, nothing changes. And he's extremely concerned with preserving things that are good and beautiful and innocent. And he says that the only thing that changes about the museum when you go back is you. Like, you may go back another time and you're wearing an overcoat, or you may go back and your classmate is sick, so you have a different, like, buddy. Or you might have just the night before heard your mom and dad yelling at each other. Or you might have seen he calls it like a gasoline slick in a puddle, like ugliness in something that should be pure, right? So that, like, all that is but a long way of saying that I think we're being exposed to, just as they are, at the right time. Like 14 and 15 is like developmentally when this happens, when you start to see like things that you can't unlearn. You can't go back to a time where you hadn't seen the killing curse. You can't go back to a time when you hadn't seen, or when you didn't have a crush. You know what I mean? Like that, because you're forever changed by these things that are inherently things that we suffer, you know? There's a reason, I guess, that it's called a crush.
Yeah.
Because it hurts.
I think this is subtly done too, in undercurrents in the story as well, with, say, like showing that through the figure of Rita Skeeter, that you can't always trust what you read in the journal, or you have to be able to think for yourself and adjust for the slant. And then also a disagreement between Dumbledore and the Ministry through using Moody, who is being criticized by Rita. And thus, you know, who do you trust? Rita, the journalist who stands for the people, or the judgment of Dumbledore, or the judgment of the Ministry? That's going to require that you have your own ability to think for yourself, because you don't necessarily know who to trust. And again, I think that's part of sort of the pattern effect of developing your consciousness at this age, that once you're out of Eden, which I think is a suitable metaphor for this, or out of just the picture white heavenly conception of the Disney castle, and now see it for more of, what it truly is in its fuller aspect, then you're seeing this everywhere now. Everything is starting to fill out a little more. So you're really going to, your perception is adjusting. And so you're going to have to, really adjust your behavior in this world very quickly. I wonder to what extent then the Triwizard Tournament is like an initiation ritual into adulthood then. And
well, that's explicitly what Fred and George are so upset about, right? Is that they're setting an arbitrary age limit rather than having it open to those with like skill and drive and all that good stuff, right? And so there's sort of different ways to try to measure or to draw that boundary. And they've set an age limit. Obviously, Harry Potter's going to get around that somehow, but the Weasleys, right? They would really like to compete, but they're just going to be kept out on the technicality. And we see them, as you mentioned, like acting way more mature than we have in the past. They clearly would, and they clearly would benefit, right, from having that shot at those 1,000 galleons.
Man, how much more interesting would it have been to see them compete than said. Sorry, go on, Sarah.
No, I mean, you're right. They got it. I sometimes wonder, like, wouldn't it be cool to read a book of their adventures?
Yes.
Like, as like that should be the next Fantastic Beasts, like Harry Potter installment. I'd like to see more Fred and George. Anyway, what I was going to say is I think the Triwizard Tournament is in some ways a bit of a red herring for maturation. Like it's supposed to be this big, like, grand event that separates the wheat from the chaff, and like it's gonna really test you. It's like, but it's still these like ministry designed tasks, these trials that they've removed the real danger to their lives. So even like no matter how like close they get to the line of mortal danger, it's still like a game. And I just like at the end of that chapter, I think it's chapter 12, when Ron is like dozing off to sleep saying, I think I'm going to go for it, which is so funny because like he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do anything to try and get himself ready to put his name in the goblet, but he gets mad that anyway, he's just going to ride his siblings' coattails again. I'm on an anti-Ron kick. On page 192 though, Harry starts to dream about having hoodwinked the impartial judge. He became the Hogwarts champion. He was standing on the grounds, his arms raised in triumph in front of the whole school, all of whom were applauding and screaming. He had just won the Triwizard Tournament. Cho's face stood out particularly clearly in the blurred crowd, her face glowing with admiration. And if you change like a couple words there, it's pretty prescient, right? Like he was standing on the ground, his arms raised in agony in front of the whole school, all of whom were applauding and screaming. He had just won the tournament. Cho's face stood out, her face like glistening with tears or something. I don't know. And I think the real test of adulthood is your reaction to the unforgivable curses that we'll see later, right? Is your reaction to like the death of another, and like that will be the rite of passage. But it's not exactly a rite that you want everybody to go through, right? Like, I don't want any of your students or mine to go through what he has to endure. But like an Olympics event sounds kind of cool, I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, yeah, I'm not sure if it's a fully formed thought just yet, but that like it's still a simulation of the things that make you grow up. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Would we want our students to go through like the non-simulation stuff? I wouldn't. I mean, I guess that's at the end of the day, like that's a good question for us to ask as teachers is like, have we simulated well enough that when they arrive at the non-simulation, are they ready to face it without I don't know, without having to like take away the protections of the scaffolding too soon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, I think at the very least, yeah, go on, Wes.
So the thing that comes to my mind about that is that, you know, the simulation is always only sort of an illusion. It's on top of, you know, the real possibility that anything could happen at any time.
Right.
So,
right.
you know, like, particularly nowadays, students are much more sort of vulnerable to or aware of their vulnerability to things like depression, anxiety, and those consequences that follow from that. So whatever kind of like absurd competition that could lead to death, well, that's really just sort of a metaphor for what's already happening anyway. You know, it's more colorful and flashy, but yeah. So it's a really interesting thought and worth.
Yeah, I agree with Wes that it also seems to illustrate the opposite as well, that even though it is an illusion and it illustrates its own illusory nature, that what underlies it is something deadly serious, like the capacity for violent injury or death. And that's part of like the simulation of an education too. It's like, yeah, you're in this school right now. You know what? You're also subject to all the natural forces and all the terrible things in the world, even though you are going along sort of a simulated track at this point. So I think that really is a very interesting point too, that we can, and that would be something very important for students to have, right? Because they become sort of disaffected because they seem to recognize the simulated nature of their experience within an education. Listen, no, students, it's actually very good for you that you're within this estuarial mental structure that we're putting you along, because actually reality is horrifying. You know, it's labyrinthine, like, complex, and will eat you.
How many times do the students say like, I'm never going to need this in real life? Or like, if I was in the real world, would being able to diagram this sentence or calculate the derivative of this equation, is this necessary? You know, and like, you want to say like, on the one hand, no, but on the other hand, abso-fucking-lutely. Like, yes, everything matters. And I think, I mean, you're right that the games of the tournament, or even like the game of Quidditch or the game of school, it's all there's a goodness to that, to it being a simulation and all of that. I don't know that I'm even using that word the way I mean. I'm not sure that that's the best word for what I'm talking about, but I think, and you're absolutely right too, that like the things that our students today are wrestling with are extraordinarily grave for some of them. And so the fact that this particular tournament presents like real serious gravity, like beyond, say, like what are they called? Like the Scroots or whatever it is that they're trying to raise in Hagrid's class, you know, like that like might eat them one day, but like doesn't present that much of a challenge / something interesting, but like is just gross. And like, or the tubers that, what's her name, Professor Sprout makes them like like harvest the pus from. Like, talk about like the ugly side of learning. But
that's right, and the necessary.
Ugly and necessary, right? Like sometimes you got to do the things that aren't flashy and cool. But yeah, I try to get them to see that like leaving school, they all want to do it so badly because they think it's where you're going to be free, but they don't necessarily know what they want to be free for. They just know what they want to be free from. And I think, and I'm speaking very generally about like the high school adolescent in general. But I think knowing what's coming and knowing what the tournament tests these young people into doing or becoming, I think it's interesting that like the figure who is younger than the others is going to be the one who maybe brings some of the really good things about school, like teamwork, the collaborative victory, brings some of those to a tournament that I guess is designed to separate people. And a book that, like, I think is a pretty obvious argument of the entire series is the virtue of teams and like community and societies and groups, collaboration. I think it's interesting that the younger, the seemingly immature, the one who shouldn't be in the tournament is the one who, who brings some of these things that like, and ultimately save a lot of, like, protect people from suffering, right?
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, what two of the major themes in this text seem to be, or at least with two of the major parts being the Triwizard Tournament as well as which brings international communities together, just as the Quidditch World Cup did, is that when humans come together to cooperate and compete in fantasy or a real world, they are bounding things together for mutual benefit. They are bonding together for mutual benefit. It seems that what the big problem is when you try and stand outside of bounding structures like games or like preset sort of rules and institutions. It's as if obviously those exist with flaws and limitations, but in sort of like the widest possible view, those also make the best possible human interactions possible, and they also produce the conditions for the outputting of the best possible human qualities, right? Like when a human is competing for the highest possible aims, then he or she will be pursuing excellence at as high a level as possible. And that's like what we see in the Olympics and what we see in the Triwizard Tournament, that we should see the game structure of many of our institutions not as something to deride, but as something that has actually been calculated to produce the best from us. And that we can them for the better too if we want to. That's fine. Games are always evolving.
Do you think this has anything to say about the way that Mad-Eye like punishes people? Like exercises discipline? Just because like he clearly steps over the line, but it's hilarious.
Well, you
right?
know what's interesting? Yeah. So I definitely did think about that.
I don't know. Like, I'm glad that Malfoy got turned into a ferret. I think that's hilarious. And it's like a yucky animal. So.
And again, that's so humiliating.
It's perfect with him.
He'll never be able to not have been turned into a ferret by a teacher, which I think is great. None of the other kids can ever say that. I mean, when Ron says, I want to sit and memorize this moment forever. Don't ruin it, Hermione. I mean, it's just so sweet. And then my father, and then Mad-Eye Moody punishes him further after he says that. It's even better. Like, that doesn't scare Moody at all. He's going to walk him right down to Snape, and even Snape's going to kind of act like a punk. It's like all of Malfoy's like faux thinking that he's the one protected. That's out the window this year. And so he's having to learn too, which I think is interesting just to connect to your boy Neville, Harry, Wes Harry, who has a kind of a tough start, but also an interesting start with his interactions with Moody and then getting that book and being called good by something, and then Harry also noticing that was a very tactful way for Moody to raise the spirits of Neville, and that's what Lupin would have done. Oh yes, and Hedwig comes back.
Right. She she bears this message that has been long awaited, right, from Sirius. And it's just what Harry was afraid of, right? That Sirius is overreacting, like he's coming back, he's going to put himself in danger. And so that aspect of it too, all of these different sort of role models that we're presented with, and sort of people that Harry potentially can look up to. Like you mentioned, Lupin is a big one. Moody, in a way, is another, right? He's a kind of parental figure here, standing up for Neville especially.
Also
And
does not care about rules, just like Harry.
well, he cares about certain rules, right?
Yes. Yes.
They're just not the school rules necessarily.
Right. No, and I think that's good.
Yeah. And
well, so, oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just gonna try to say something. I'm not sure what exactly, about how Sirius is also there. He's waiting in the wings. And this was a point I wanted to make real quick, was just how we're prepared for certain characters' entrances. Like Sirius Black is there from, like the second page of the first book, and then he's finally brought on stage in book 3. But if I'm remembering right, I haven't heard of Mad Eye Moody before. And then suddenly he's mentioned like 10 times in 3 pages, and then he's like very unmistakably a major character in this book, but maybe one that she sort of just came up with a little late in the game. I don't know.
That's interesting, because how we get excited for him is that Fred and George are excited about him. And so it's like when they're excited about something, especially when they've been reserved, it's something that's like bad to some extent, right? Something that goes outside the scope of behavior, something that's going to potentially get you in trouble. And so this is like a big risk that Dumbledore seems to be taking with putting Mad Eye Moody in there. So Dumbledore seems to be recognizing the situation in the world, that darkness is rising and these students are going to have to face it. And that's why he's bringing Moody in right now as a special favor, to teach them specifically about curses. So I don't know whether that theory gets a hole poked in it later when we find out the truth about Moody. But maybe.
Well, I don't know that, like, just because what we find out about Moody later, well, just because we do find that out doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that Dumbledore wasn't thinking what you're suggesting that he's thinking. Like when Moody says, I'll be here for a year, he says something, there is something in here about, he understands that, like, it's like stuff's getting serious out there. I've got 1 year to teach you, how to deal with dark. There's some, on page 211 and 212, it says, Dumbledore's got a higher opinion of your nerves. He reckons you can cope, and I say the sooner you know what you're up against, the better. As though Dumbledore knows that it's time, and it may not be like you're totally ready, but it's good to throw you into the deep end and see if you can swim, I guess.
Yeah, which makes me wonder to what extent Dumbledore even knows who this really is, and to what extent this really is the real thing, and the students being, exposed to it. Okay, so y'all, we're getting to that time. We got to decide on our holiday plans, and so did one of y'all want to start? I can always start, because I always think of kind of a couple options beforehand. But did either of you think of a holiday sort of wintry wizarding activity that you would want to take place in around this late December time? I guess it's sort of still early, but it will be late soon.
I thought maybe sledding with elves would be fun. I don't know, that, like, they got all those pots and pans down in the kitchens, and they seem to have really endless supplies of magical ability. So throwing them a bunch of hats and gloves so that they're all free, and then going sledding with them, and just like flying over the frozen lake, and seeing the lake monster down, the giant squid like swimming around under the ice, and I I just think that would be really, really fun. They could build some really sweet snow man or snow elves or something, and have some good snowball fights and all that good stuff. That's what I was thinking.
Would you also throw to them health insurance forms? Because they must have health insurance and pensions. And it's funny because you also remind me of Colin Creevy's younger brother and him seeing everything with wide-eyed wonder for the first time, reminding us of us first seeing everything with wide-eyed wonder. But I love that. Yeah, I think those house elves would be good fun. Sarah, what were you thinking? And I can go too, whenever.
I had a couple wintry activities. One sort of related to Wes. I was thinking more like what would I do with magic to amplify winter here, and I think I would just like basically construct the perfect skiing conditions. I have something I really want to be doing right now, and there isn't a lot of snow in the mountains at the moment. But to be able to, I don't know, kind of like have a time turner to go skiing whenever the powder is perfect is something that seems nice. The other thing I really like about Christmas or Christmas time is I love the holiday lights. I like going to see neighborhoods that are all decorated with crazy lights. And Seattle is, I don't know if they're known for it, but the holiday spirit is like alive and well here. And it's so much more than in DC. Like there's just houses and entire blocks, neighborhoods that are like the electric bill just must be sky high right now. And I think if some kind of like enchanted holiday light neighborhood could be, amplified with magic, that'd be cool. I'm thinking like light displays that can also like be in motion, like dance, twinkle light strands that could move into different shapes, that could, I don't know, tell a scene or a story. And then, yeah, I don't know, that's not super creative, but there's already a lot of magic at Christmas. So.
Oh, yeah.
True enough. And so I guess I threw out some ideas. Like I've been seeing a lot of stage performances lately, and I got to see A Christmas Carol at the wonderful Net Theater in Old Town, San Diego this Friday. And so I was thinking maybe a production with some real ghosts. That'd be pretty cool. And some real magical effects, though the stage is always magical, and that it draws my attention away from that which I guess I might usually see and towards that which I might not usually see, and thus is very interesting. But I'd also like to, anywhere where the Weasley twins are, and possibly Molly Weasley baking stuff, that's where I want to go. So, and if I were to make it even more ideal, I'd want to hang out with the Weasleys at a party they would throw at their joke shop after they found it, because I think that would just be so fun. And one thing I would hope would be there would be food that would transform you into the holiday character that your attitude was like. And I know I do a lot of transformation like this, but like you turn into a Grinch or a Scrooge if you don't have the right spirit, or you don't, bring anything to the party. You can turn into, I don't know. Who else could you turn into? Other holiday figures. You can turn into Snoopy, I guess, if you're especially creative. You can turn into Buddy the Elf. Yeah, sure. Yeah, but that was my idea. Or I would like to go to a Weasley, a Fred and George Weasley party. Ron can come too, I guess. Not a main feature. And I'd also like to see a stage performance with real ghosts.
Wait, now why? I don't know. I'm not sure about all this hating on Ron Weasley. He's he's pretty tall for his age. He's very loyal. I mean, let's go. Come on.
He is loyal, and that does come out again.
Is he? Is he loyal? Come on.
Okay. Well, we have a good opening question for next time, and so because I didn't get through the reading on this, and it's interesting to see you really wanted to hold him to the fire. You can tell it's that time of the semester, Sarah, at the end of it when our patience gets thin, that you're just like, is there a redeeming aspect of him? I don't know. I do not know. And so
I've just been with my basketball team, and that's sort of how I'm feeling at the end of a Monday. It's really, is there redemption?
And it is late on a Monday for some teachers. That's true. As we're getting towards the teacher witching hour, which is 10 and 15. So yeah, we were thinking 15, 16, 17 for next time. Bow Battens and Durmstrang. And so you got that sort of French and German flair and that sort of feminine and masculine. I can't wait to talk about that quite a bit. 16, the Goblet of Fire, and 17, the Four Champions. And maybe we could do 18, but I don't know. We're getting towards finals over in these necks of the woods. So maybe I'll be able to get through this.
Let's just play it by ear over the course of the week. How about that?
Cool. I really love that. Sounds good. We'll just use our wands.
Okay. And our spew button.
AKA our phone.
We also have to wear our spew buttons. That's important.
SPEW.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right.
Get it right, Wes.
Also those.
All right.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
All right. Good luck, and hopefully your students get some newts. And we'll tend to the screws.
Take it easy.